For today's video, Ant and I have to go through 10 different albums and answer the question, are they overrated or underrated? But before we actually jump into that, if you guys would like to support us on YouTube and get early access to one YouTube video per week, custom badges next to your name for live streams and other cool features, you guys could actually support us and become a member by hitting the join button or actually checking out that link in the description.
Yes, sir.
And much love to all the members, but let's get into this episode. We're starting off with Utopia by Travis Scott, and this is interesting because the album's still very fresh, but there's been a lot of talk and a lot of different criticisms about the album, and I feel like a big one is the fact that this is a Yeezus replica, or Travis Scott did not address the Astroworld situation.
Or there wasn't 20 sicko modes on the same album. I've seen a lot. And honestly...
Well, this is not Astroworld 2.0. What did I get here?
And that's what I like about the album, if I'm being completely honest with you. I think that it's 2 weeks now that it's been out, more or less, and I've had time to live with the album. I've gone through the track list on multiple occasions, and to be quite honest with you, I think it's perfectly rated. And if I have to kind of explain that and go into more detail, I'll put it like this. While yes, I do feel like there was a fair share of criticism about the album because maybe there's a lack of bangers, quote unquote, and you have Meltdown, Schizo, yeah, My Eyes, like there's so many big standout tracks for me. I do feel like the community absolutely loves this album for the most part. Going into the comment section, let's say on our first launch video, or even on the album review, looking at the first week sales, it being one of the biggest commercial releases for Travis Scott in his career, I do feel like it got the attention it deserved. While yes, you also had the fair share of criticism, there's always going to be criticism on an album, and for the most part, the reception was really good on it.
Yeah, and this album sounds like the music industry at large, like all gathered into one room and said, we need Utopia to kick some fucking ass. And like they did that. Like they had like the most expensive sounding album in years, an A-list ensemble cast of features, and everybody showed up to the game, everybody delivered. And I think that it is underrated because when you're looking at even the score it got on Metacritic, it got like a 63, which is one of his lowest ratings from critics
okay, so
at
you're
large.
going to go underrated for Utopia.
I'm going to go underrated. Even though it's a blockbuster and it's like one of the biggest albums we've gotten in years, I still feel like there is a sentiment that it's not as good as his best work, but I think that even though for me it could be considered his worst studio album, it's still better than a variety of mainstream albums, and this was the reset that the mainstream hip-hop space needed. And when it comes to really giving you grandiose art album experiences, there's no one that can carry that torch that Kanye left behind better than Travis Scott.
I completely agree with you.
He did that here.
I completely agree with you. But I feel like it's if you know, you know situation. Like even Fantano gave it a great score, rated it almost,
That's
I think
true.
the same thing as Astroworld. So,
7 on 10, I think.
So I think for the community, at least what from I've observed and like the commercial success, the shows, everything around it, I'd say it's good. It's perfectly good.
Let's try to go underrated or overrated, though. Let's really try to like give
if
it to
I
one
had
or
to
the
edge,
other.
yeah, I'd probably
Shut
go
the edge.
underrated just
Okay.
because, like you said, you go to Metacritic and there's a 63 score on
Yeah.
there, which I don't understand. But if you had to ask me, I think it's perfectly good.
Okay, let's now go on to Yeezus by Kanye West, a very, suitable album to follow up with. And I love talking Yeezus with every hip-hop head that I meet because I feel like literally everybody has a different opinion on this album. So when it comes to Yeezus, a lot of the complaints with this album and a lot of the criticisms were, well, this is Kanye's most underwritten album ever. Or Kanye West didn't revolutionize the hip-hop space because Death Grips did it first. They brought industrial hip-hop to the scene first. But like, to me, that those are just really invalid reasons just because even when you're looking at what Kanye West did here, he's being super adventurous, bringing in techno, trap music, post-punk music, electronic, and merging them all together to give them this unique sound that I haven't heard from any other artist before. And that's what the Yeezus experience does for me, is that it wows me, it shocks me in all the best ways.
I'm completely on the same page as you. I think it's actually an underrated album,
It
if
is.
you had to ask me. It's one of his best in the catalog. And I also think when you have to look at song concepts, like let's say something like A New Slaves and talking about how the industry is taking these artists and they're under control and they're using, let's say, luxury to be able to tie them in and have them become some submissive to what the money is doing from the higher ups in the record labels. These are very forward-thinking song concepts that Kanye was putting into his album experience. And even looking at the bangers on this album, something like a Bound 2, something like a Blood on the Leaves, something like a Black Skinhead, these for me, in my opinion, are top tier Kanye West bangers, and they lie within an album like this. Not only that, but you could argue that this is probably one of Kanye's most focused albums.
It is.
It clocks in at 10 songs only, and there is no filler within this track list. You are going to find super memorable songs all across the board, and when I look at a Kanye West fan that says that this might be his best album, I can't even blame you. As I listen, I have Graduation over it. I have The College Dropout. You guys know my rankings. But I do think that there is a lot of value in this album, and it's easily, I think, one of the best of 2013 as well.
Absolutely. And I just feel like, the whole criticism of it's underwritten. Like, to me, Kanye West, said so much by saying so little. And he did put corporate America under the microscope, and he was sort of like making a revolution with every song where he's saying fuck you to the people that, didn't accept him at Nike, to the people that didn't want to allow him into the gates of the fashion industry world. And I feel like if you really dive deep within this album, he's rapping about the problems with consumerism and all these different issues.
It's actually super deep when you actually dive into it.
And he accomplishes that theme and that message by saying things in such a simple and very brash way.
Well, it's not only that, because I feel like the writing of the album also meets the production of it, because
it's manic as fuck.
Exactly, but it's, as you said, I like the word brash because Kanye is matching that same tempo with the production that goes behind it. There was no smoke and mirrors with this album. What you see is what you get with Yeezus, and you really have to pay attention to how the production is laid out and how he delivers his lyrics. So I think it's underrated.
It's definitely underrated, and even the way that he'll find like beauty within the madness on something like On Site, where you have this crazy electronic explosive beat, and then you just have this beat switch to this nice fucking soul sample, and you're like, what the fuck? Where are we? Where are we right
absolutely.
now? Amazing album, definitely underrated. And you do have people like Charlemagne that called it whack. You have Fantano that gave it a 5 out of 10. So I think a lot of critics didn't get it, but I do feel like it was ahead of its time. And we're hearing that for the influence on something like Utopia, on something like Testing by A$AP Rocky, and a bunch of other projects. So it's aged gracefully, but let's now go on to the Marshall Mathers LP2 by Eminem. And listen, I get it. You get a part 2 to Stan, which is like 7 minutes long. You get a pretty dope collaboration with Kendrick Lamar and Love Game. You get 6 songs like Groundhog Day or Brainless. But to me, this is not a fitting sequel. It does not capture the darkness, and it's not anywhere near as daring as the original album to me.
And even if you want to not compare it, let's say, to the original, all right?
Yeah.
Let's just call a spade a spade. It's obviously not going to live up to the Marshall Mathers LP.
Okay, fair
That's
enough.
arguably a top 10 album of all time, and I don't think I'd be doing this album justice if I were to do that. When I go into a live stream on YouTube, every single week, there is an Eminem fan that is trying to convince me that this is a top-tier album in his discography. I have seen so many forums, so many Reddit posts, and so many different blogs, just absolutely praise and...
the defense is always like Eminem is rapping at this elite level. And I'm like, bro, like he's doing a Yoda voice on Rhyme or Reason. Like
it's the epitome of Eminem's quick rapping, but him not saying all that much, if I'm being completely honest with you. Yes, you do maybe have some more deeper emotional cuts, let's say like Headlights with Nate Royce, for example, but for the most part, even the biggest songs on the album, like a Berserk, like the Monster, for example, these big singles have not aged well whatsoever, and I haven't revisited these in years. Even something like, let's say, Berserk, bro, my goodness, that is not a good song.
Yeah, I think this album showed us that Eminem needs to stay as far away from Rick Rubin as he possibly can, and that's no shade to Rick Rubin because he's an amazing producer, but the two of them together is a disaster, bro.
Well,
when you're looking at a lot of the rock remix on here, like Berserk, when you're looking at Rhyme or Reason, you're like, this is really distasteful, bro. Like you're really putting these songs to shame. Not only that, but you go to a song like I think it's called So Far, where Eminem's rapping over this country ass beat. You're like, bro, why are we doing this? And that's what's crazy is that this is why it's overrated. A lot of fans also defend it, saying, oh, it's so nostalgic. It took me back to the first Marshall Mathers LP, and I'm like, In what world?
What world is happening? Like, where do you get The Way I Am? Where do you get Marshall Mather? Where do you get Criminal? There's none of those tracks on here. Nowhere near. The only track I do like that I think was actually a decent remake was Bad Guy. I'm actually a fan of that song.
Bad Guy's good. Groundhog Day, Brainless. It has its highlights.
But when I go into something like Love Game, I'm a massive Kendrick Lamar fan, and Eminem's one of my favorite rappers of all time. It's overrated. It's not even that great of a song, dude. Like, it's just, you could do so much more with a Kendrick Lamar feature, and we make a romantic love ballad that has a bit of a comedic value to it. I'm like, where the curation choices on this album are extremely poor. I think it's an overrated album.
It's definitely an overrated album. But next up, we have Dark Lane demo tapes by Drake, and I feel like this is an underrated album, and it's not even an album, it's a mixtape, and we do have maybe a couple of other mixtapes on here, but I think that I view it as an album just because it's my favorite Drake project to come out of this decade when I look at the 2020s.
Oh, that's interesting.
I feel like it's so funny that, to me, Drake's most focused album, for the most part, to come out of the last couple of years is a compilation of leaks and Lucy's. Like, that's how you feel, because you have this certain dark, moody, lo-fi atmosphere that's built all the way from Deep Pockets all the way down to Demons and War at the end of the track list. It's sort of present all throughout, and you're getting Drake at some of his best lyrical performances with stuff like Losses or When to Say When. You're getting an all-time great R&B cut with Not You 2 featuring Chris Brown.
That's a fantastic track. Chicago Freestyle, Deep Pockets, just so much quality all throughout the track list. And the conversation around Drake's recent catalog is always around CLB. It's around Her Loss. But
no one talks about this.
But this I've seen praise on Twitter, but I do feel like this is one of his best efforts from the past 5 years, if I'm being completely honest with you. I low-key revisit this project more than I do Scorpion, which is pretty crazy to think about. And when we did our audio podcast on underrated songs from popular albums, something like Losses, dude, it's one of the least streamed songs in his entire catalog, but yet one of the best written. It feels like the baby version of a Do Not Disturb, and you have songs on there still, like a From Florida with Love. The only thing I don't like about the album are certain tracks.
Don't say Demons, because that's an absolutely fire drill song with tons of energy.
Not a fan.
That's why it's like, even the songs like that get a lot of flack, I'm a really big fan of. Even something like War, for example. I feel like Drake took on the UK rap sound with a lot of respect and a lot of flair. I thought that was a banger.
It probably did super well in the UK, and it did well for that audience. I'm not a fan of also 1993. Pain 1993.
It's not bad. It's not a fucking
But if I'm being completely honest with you, it is a skip on the album for me, because I like to run from start to finish.
Fine. And there's 14 songs.
I like to go from start to finish with this track list, and that's always something that I kind of skip over. But underrated?
Underrated, without a doubt. Definitely deserves more conversation and respect. But next up, we have Dawn FM by The Weeknd. And this is an interesting album for me just because I have different phases with it. It came out in the wintertime, and since I heard it in January, it's something that I always go back to when it gets colder out. And I think that a lot of people expected this album to be bigger because this is the album that followed After Hours. This is an album that followed an album that was aligned with a Super Bowl halftime show, that had one of the biggest hits of all time with Blinding Lights, that sold 400 or 500,000 copies first week. So people expected another grand spectacle, but what you got instead was a very minimal rollout, very to the point, not too much lead up into this album. But you got maybe The Weeknd's most focused concept album out of this thing.
And I feel like it also plays so well next to After Hours because of the way that the concept bleeds into each other. So obviously with After Hours, The Weeknd being in the lust sort of phase, and we've explained this on the channel a bunch of different times, and Dawn FM sort of being the regret phase for The Weeknd, and him going through Phantom Regret. And there's just so many well done curation choices on this album. Like, example, having Jim Carrey being a narrator here, it being close to, I believe, it clocks in at only 16 songs, so even the track list was perfectly sequenced. There's not a skip on this album for me, if I'm being completely honest with you. Everything hits, all the types of different aesthetics and production choices that went into this project. I do feel like it is a top tier Weeknd project when it comes to his discography.
And that's the thing. I think that's what makes it underrated for me, is the fact that when I hear a lot of Weeknd fans speak, they'll have Kissland or they'll have other projects above this, and I'm like, this is a top tier weekend album.
It
Like, this
really is. And
for
I
sure
feel
top 3 or top 4.
it is in that
my
range for
opinion.
me. Absolutely. And I do think when you have to look at certain songs, like something like a Gasoline, where he's trying out different cadences, something like a Sacrifice.
Or his rendition of Japanese City Pop on Out of Time, amazing single.
Amazing single. I just think that people overlook this album because it came out right next to After Hours, and it's the predecessor.
When do you see a pop star making an album like this, where he's giving you this concept of purgatory and making it sound so familiar and so electrifying and comforting at the same time? Like, that was so badass to see, bro. To see The Weeknd pull that off.
It was incredible from start to finish. I really do think it's an underrated album.
Yeah.
Not only for The Weeknd's catalog, but just as far as the community and the masses go. Like, I still see more conversations around something like not a Dawn FM, excuse me, like an After Hours. So I think it's underrated. But let's continue going on with this. This next album is going to be a very funny one to talk about because a lot of people did not agree with our take on this album, and we want to further explain ourselves. A Gift and a Curse by Gunna. So going back into the album for this episode, and I've had some time to live with it, and I've revisited certain tracks, I still feel the same way, man. I'm being completely honest. I think it's a mediocre effort from Gunna. I don't like too much from it. And I saw something very interesting on Twitter, and it got a lot of steam, and people were having a conversation around this. People don't necessarily buy into the music of the album, but they buy into the narrative of it.
Absolutely.
And they buy into the underdog story of Gunna and him coming out and him being able to release this album. As far as the production goes, I do like Turbo as far as a producer is, but for a full project and having him on every single song, the lack of Wheezy beats for me definitely made this album sleepier. The biggest song on the album, of Fuck You Mean, I mean,
Stagnant flow, weak bars.
I mean, brother,
maybe the most annoying vocal sample ever.
It's being used in mommy workout videos. Like, cool, have it, man, have it. TikTok, oh, you guys could take that track, but the whole like,
shout out to the TikTok mommies.
Fuck you mean? Like, okay, bro, I'm cool. Like, and we were having this conversation with Mark and Nick. You take that "fuck you mean" out of there, and it's actually a really good song. It's just that it rings way too much.
Well,
throughout the
to me, it's more the yeah. Like that's what really gets under my skin. It's just really annoying. But more than that, I just feel like I was rooting for Gunna when it came to this album. I'm like, fuck, he might come back and drop the hardest shit of his life. And instead, he didn't really end up living up to par,
DS
bro.
Forever absolutely wipes this.
There's
no competition.
So many disappointing songs. Even looking at Back at It, you have this awkward pitch shifting that comes in for no reason, and then you have this build up to this drop of bass that never ends up coming. And you have a lot of those songs where it's like we're building up to no climax that's not present whatsoever. The only song that I'm really bumping off of this thing, to be honest with you, would probably be Back to the Moon.
Even something like Cash It, I was a fan of that track. But for the most part, I mean, I may be only going back to 2 to 3 songs in a 15-track Gunna album. And that's something that I've always loved Gunna for, is these album experiences. You know how much I like Gunna's albums. Something like a Wanna, something like a DS3, something like a DS Forever was in constant rotation for 2022 and is still in my rotation. But with this,
it's Gunna being as predictable as ever. It's overrated, and people are calling it, better than Thugger's album, or one of the best albums of the year, one of the best trap albums we've got in a long time, and I just don't see the hype.
I completely disagree.
Absolutely. But next up, we have Renaissance by Beyoncé, and this might be a controversial take, but I do think that as someone that's enjoyed Lemonade, as someone that's enjoyed her self-titled album, I'm honestly in disbelief with how much praise this album is getting, to the point where every critic is in love with it. It's getting fucking nominated for Best Album of the Year at the Grammys. And to me, it lacks a lot of the emotional depth that you would have gotten on previous Beyoncé records. And that's fine, because I get what she was going for here. She was going to make a dance record, and it kind of feels like a club set where there is this constant energy. There's the influence of Afro beats and all these different aesthetics. But when it came down to it, I feel like on songs like Thick, or songs as well like Church Girl, am I listening to Beyoncé or City Girls? Like, to me, it's just like I'm not even getting these rare, incredible vocal performances that I'm used to getting from Beyoncé on this record.
Listen, yeah, and I completely agree with you. I feel like the record's a bit empty, at least in my opinion, when it comes down to the content matter. And like you said, when you go to a Lemonade or a self-titled, Beyonce's an incredible writer, and she's one of the best to ever do it. She's a legend in any genre, and we've been listening to her music for such a long time. I mean, my family members are fans of her music, and we were rooting for this album to come out, and then once you get it, you're like, well, I guess it's just not for me. I guess it's one of those albums that's just not for me.
Like Break My Soul was a beautiful song, a great way to kick off the rollout. But yeah, I just feel like there was a lot of missed opportunities. Even something like Cozy, for example, which had a cool message about her being comfortable in her skin. It just didn't have any vocals or any, sections of that track that were sonically appealing to me. And a lot of sort of over sexual tones.
Yeah, like it's a bit raunchy.
That I'm like,
no, it's a bit raunchy to a
okay,
certain extent.
and listen, there's nothing wrong with that. She's expressing herself. It's an album about self-expression, about feeling herself. Cool. A lot of people are going to enjoy it. Maybe I'm not the target audience for it,
we're
but
definitely not the target audience.
I really don't think so.
I don't think you and I are the target audience for this album.
But even something like Heated, that was originally Drake's song. The reference track is better than her version. I'm just going to put that out there.
Sheesh, people are going to come
Let it rain over me, bro. Let the hate rain over me. Let it rain over me. But yeah, overrated album.
Yeah, it's an
Absolutely.
overrated album. Yeah.
But let's keep on going. Next up, we have Coloring Book by Chance the Rapper. And this was an interesting one just because
It won a Grammy.
It won a Grammy. Although I do think it's a really solid album. I think that when you look at gospel hip-hop records, people don't realize the influence that Chance the Rapper had with this project, with acid rap, and you're getting a lot of quality cuts on here. I love the Chicago house sound that he brought with All Night that Kate Trinata helped to make. I also love something like, for example, the intro. I also love Blessings. You also have some trap flavors with Mixtape, which was a bit of a miss for me, but you have Chance the Rapper experimenting, and a lot of those experiments work out for the most part. But to say that this was the best album of 2016,
I feel like that's
where
the only
are we going with this?
Okay, because if I had to look at it from, let's say, a track list standpoint, Tunnel Vision only on the track list, I think it's perfectly rated. I think that people say it for what it is, and I think that a lot of Chance the Rapper fans do agree that, acid rap is his best ever project. That's never up for debate. So I think yes, but amongst the critics and amongst the Grammys, yeah, there's no doubt. There's really no doubt that it's overrated. I love the album. I go back to it every so often. I think that there's magic within this album.
Yeah,
but
there is.
To say that it's the best album of 2016, no, I completely disagree on that front. I think there are better albums, and I do feel like, again, only amongst the critics, it is overrated.
Yeah, because I feel like it was treated as like this grand experience, but at the end of the day, it is a mixtape. It does have a loose feeling to it, and it's not like there's this greater picture being painted.
Is it actually considered? Is it considered a mixtape?
It's labeled as a mixtape. Yeah.
Let me check Wikipedia real quick.
It is, yeah, because what's it called? The Big Day is his debut album, right? So
that's there you go.
There you go. But yeah, apart from that, I mean, not too many misses. Juke Jam was one of those awkward placements that's
true. It's a mixtape.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, not too many misses. I just don't think that it was all that was hyped up to be in terms of the Grammy love and everything else. But 2 albums left. Another album that I'm excited to talk about is An Evening with Silk Sonic by Silk Sonic, Bruno Mars, and Anderson .Paak. And this is an album that we did a review on, we really enjoyed. And I think that people don't realize how lucky we were to get 2 artists at the peak of their powers to go back and revitalize 1970s Motown soul and do it with so much vigor and so much respect for the genre. And to me, it feels like such an outlier to get these pop stars. Well, I guess Anderson's not as much of a pop star as Bruno Mars, but to get them to actually create a pop album, quote unquote, that's charting and doing all these numbers with all live instrumentation and such an old aesthetic, it was mind-blowing.
It's a massive accomplishment for the 2020s decade, in my opinion, for R&B, and also a bit of elements of hip-hop here and there. There are rapping performances.
Soul, funk, everything.
So many different blends and fusions of production. And yes, while it did get a lot of hype when it first dropped, now in 2023, people are still talking more about Renaissance. And I'm like, well, sheesh, I guess that's where we're at now, you know? So
Yeah.
I do feel like it's a tad underrated, at least for the community and our community, because I don't see as much conversation around it as maybe even some Frank Ocean projects, to be quite honest with you. Like, it's really up there for me as far as quality goes, and even the Weeknd's projects. Like, this album is really, really something special. And just as you said, to recapture that old sound and bring it into a modern setting, and to see Bruno and Anderson's, you know, sort of chemistry come together for this beautiful performance that sees them in harmony, it knocks off every single box for me. And going even back to it and having certain songs in my rotation, I'm always impressed and pleased with every second or third or fourth or fifth or sixth listen I give it.
It's timeless music.
It
you
is
look at
timeless
Leave the
music.
Door Open. Most songs these days that go number 1, number 2, or number 3, you hear them and you enjoy them for a couple of weeks and then they're fucking out of here. With something like Leave the Door Open, that's timeless music. That's extraordinary musicianship in terms of them being behind the drums or doing whatever they're doing. Even looking at Put on a Smile. Some of the most heart-wrenching vocal performances that I've heard in years. These guys have to be applauded for what they did, and even the way they presented this album when it came to the costumes,
class and
the artwork, the fact that it's so concise at only 10 songs. Like, this is just a blast from the past for me, and something, and that was a big criticism. Oh, all they did was bring back an old sound. There's no innovation here. They're not doing anything special. Get that the fuck out of here,
people
bro.
made this music before. Well, people have been making music for a very long time, ladies and gentlemen. So I do feel like they did something special here.
A tad underrated was the best way to put it.
Yeah, a tad underrated because it did get a lot of critical reception.
Yeah.
So if I had to really say, I think it's perfectly rated just because,
Fair enough.
while it did get the critical acclaim,
It's just slept on still.
it still is kind of slept on. But okay, let's end this off with Limbo by Amine. One of these albums from 2020 that I feel like went under the radar for a lot of people, especially when it comes to the quality of this project, because I do feel like it's the best written Amine album. I do feel like the production is super dynamic. I love the sequencing of the album. I love the features of this album. I do think it is one of the best efforts from that year. And going back to this album, there's so many tracks I love to revisit. Something like Roots with Charlie Wilson and JID. Something like Can't Decide, Compensating with Young Thug, Shimmy, the whole Old Dirty Bastard rendition and bringing that back into here. Pressure in My Palms and the epic beat switch at the end. You have songs on here like Riri, for example, that's more of like the pop sort of centric, record for the album that still really does hit.
Yeah.
Overall, I can't find much in here that I don't enjoy. Even something like Mama is one of the best tracks of 2020 and people don't talk about
Absolutely. And I think that, like, when it comes to every Amine album, they're all underrated because he's just simply underrated as an artist. I feel like he should be spoken about by the community a bit more. I feel like he deserves to be up there with some of the best emerging talents that we still have. And I just love the fact that he went from being viewed as this one-hit wonder that wasn't going to have a future in hip-hop to him creating and curating an album that is so layered and so meaningful. You look at a song like Burden and him rapping about his own mortality, just the maturity that you got from Amine from everything before Limbo leading up to Limbo, and just seeing his personality just radiating throughout this album.
And also his ability to be able
sing.
to connect with so many different artists. That was something that I was really impressed with, because if you look at this feature list, it's super diverse here. You have Injury Reserve, you have Summer Walker, you have Vince Staples, Young Thug, JID. These are all artists that play on such different levels and make such different music from one each other, but when you actually get into the context of the album, they all bring something unique and refreshing to the soundscape and to the feel of it.
And yeah, a lot of people just felt like, Amine was, just a very shallow rapper, didn't have much to bring to the table, but he showed a lot of lyrical maturity, his ability to make a concept album as well with Limbo, and that's why it's so great. But guys, let us know in the comments.
By the way, it's underrated.
Yeah, it's underrated. If we didn't, I think we said it already, but just to
underrated.
say, definitely underrated. But guys, let us know, how do you feel about these albums? How have they aged? Are they underrated? Are they overrated? And which albums should we bring in the next time? As always, guys, much love. Thank you so much for supporting. And as we mentioned, if you guys would like to become a member, the link is available in the description to get a bunch of cool features and support us. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.